This episode of From Angel to Exit is brought to you by the CEO's Right Hand. The CEO's Right Hand provides customized outsourced finance, accounting, and human resource services tailored to small and medium-sized businesses. Their services include fractional CFO, HR support, capital raising, and financial infrastructure development. They emphasize personalized engagements and expert support to drive growth and operational efficiencies. If you want to find out more, visit theceosrighthand.co. Now, let's get on with our episode. Are you serious about planning a successful business exit? From Angel to Exit is your go-to resource. Subscribe to our newsletter at eckfeldt.com/podcast for even more valuable insights. And to get personalized guidance, take our free exit readiness assessment. It's just 24 questions, and it will give you a clear picture of your exit readiness. Find the assessment at eckfeldt.com/exit. Submit your results, and we'll schedule a free follow-up call to discuss your specific situation and the best way to maximize your valuation and ensure a successful transaction. Now, back to the episode. Welcome, everyone. This is From Angel to Exit. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. Our guest today is Shreesha Ramdas. We're going to talk to him about his experience. He's had several experiences. I'm excited for this. A lot of interesting kind of insights that some of our prep calls and stuff. I was like, we're probably going to need 6 episodes to cover everything, but we're going to try to cover as much as we can today. And really doing some interesting stuff as well with all of the kind of information and resources and learning that he's had in terms of the exits that he's had, applying it to his new company. And I'm excited to talk about that and what founders can learn during the process and how they improve. I love entrepreneurs because they're always looking to figure out how to sharpen the axe and figure out how to do it better. And Shreesha has definitely done that. So with all that, Shreesha, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you about my journey.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on. So let's go back in time and kind of give us a little bit of background. Like, what was your professional background? How did you kind of get into a position of actually being a founder? Like, give us the kind of the building up to that and what you learned as part of that process.
Yeah, so as I was growing up, Bruce, I never thought I'll be an entrepreneur, founder.
No?
I was always asked by my parents to watch every step that I take, right? So that gives you an idea about my risk mindset back then. And, I think the inflection point was landing in California. And this is a place where I think the evolution happened where initially I was like, I cannot come up with an idea, but I can work hard for somebody else. And then it morphed into, hey, I can contribute to ideas here and there. And then eventually it morphed to, hey, I can come up with an idea as well. Right. So, and one thing that helped me early in the career, and this goes out to all the next gen entrepreneurs, is I focused on developing the skill set and didn't chase the dollars.
Okay, tell me more about it. What's an example?
So I always felt like if I continue to hone my skills, then eventually I'll get awarded what I deserve.
Got it.
But if I chase the going after a job that was high salary, I may be compromising elsewhere. Okay. And so I would rather go for a job that provided me that exposure, where I can develop that skill, and then eventually, the dollar would pursue. So that's the mindset I always had. And to give you some perspective there, early on, I was an engineer, was managing engineering groups. And then I realized, like, in order to be a good entrepreneur, I need to understand, beyond engineering. Yeah. And that's where I, took a bold step. I transitioned over to sales. And when I transitioned over to sales, I had to take a salary cut because I didn't have any experience to show. Yeah. And so that's where I'm talking about, like, going after the job that can provide you the right exposure is very important, because the more exposure you get, the better you will do as a founder.
Yeah. Now, how did you figure out what exposure you wanted or needed? I mean, obviously having these kind of engineering skills is hugely valuable, but there's lots of other things you could have gone into. Like, was sales like a choice? Like, it was like, oh, I really need to learn sales, or was this like sales was just the opportunity, and you realized this would be a good chance to kind of expand your horizons?
Yeah. So, again, I'll share one of my favorite statements, which is I learn more from people than a browser. And it's just because when you meet people and you hear their experiences and stories, you internalize it more versus just reading a book or reading it on a browser. So I've always tried to meet as many people as possible and leverage the wisdom of crowd. And so early on, I met, once this thing dawned on me that I can come up with an idea. I was like, how do I ensure that I can take this idea to success? And so I set up a lot of coffee meeting with startup founders to understand what they have learned. And one thing I realized is having an all-round experience goes a long way.
Yeah.
If you look at founders or CEOs of the company, early on, a lot of the sales people used to be, people from the sales function used to be the CEOs of the company. It's changing a little bit now. A lot more product guys are becoming the CEOs.
Yeah.
And I looked at those stats and I realized that I'm good in building stuff, good in engineering, doing engineering things, but I need to understand sales. I need to understand marketing, and that's what that's what basically resulted in me chasing a sales opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. And so tell us, you mentioned at some point you realized, hey, I can come up with an idea, right? Like this is certainly possible. How did you go from kind of the realization that you could come up with an idea to actually developing the idea? Like what was that gap like?
Yeah. So once I realized that I can come up with an idea, then again, I went back to the first principles in saying like, how can I take the idea to success? And few things I realized. One is, as I mentioned, that understanding that I need to have an all-round experience. So engineering, product, sales, marketing. Second is having a good team, having a good co-founder is important. There are founders who fly solo and do really well. I know my strengths and weakness. I'm not one of them. I love to have a sounding board. I love to have a partner, sounding board, distribution of roles. All of that goes a long way. And so finding a right partner is really important because, if you are starting a startup with another founder or multiple founders, then it's like a marriage. You have to have that chemistry. You have to understand that it's okay to argue, but never disrespect. And how do you augment your strengths? That's really, really important. So finding out, chasing the right founder, figuring out who will be part of the early team was an important aspect. And once you have all these on the table, you are feeling confident, then you just get started. Now, obviously, there are two ways to get started. Either you bootstrap it, Bruce, or you find an investor. And I decided to bootstrap it. And what we did was we leveraged a little bit of services background that we had to generate some revenues so that we could sustain for a long time. And then, when you start, the initial journey is about finding out product market fit. My framework that I use, and this could be useful for all the founders, is startup essentially is a fitness journey. And what I mean by that is initially you have to determine market fit, which is the idea that you're choosing is essentially a large TAM that you're going after. After you have done the market fit, you do problem fit, which is basically, is a problem that you're going after, it's truly solving an intense pain? Or is the buying decision can be postponed. Basically, the painkiller versus vitamin, right?
Okay.
The decision about painkiller is imminent,
Yeah.
vitamin can be postponed. So
Yeah.
figure that out. So go after the right problem. And after that, it's a product market fit. Basically, whatever prototype product you have or whatever solution you have conceived,
Yeah.
is it resonating? And then after product market fit, there's go to market fit. That is the product that you have built, the messaging that you have developed around the product, about the pain, about the need, about the solution, is that resonating with the market? And then the last step is scale fit. As you get the product market fit, as you get the go to market fit, as you are now generating revenues, at what point do you keep going, or at what point you think about, I've reached my max limit, now it's time to exit?
Yeah.
So that's the framework that I determine. And
So I have a question. So is this a framework you've developed in retrospect, or is this when you were sitting down and starting the company where you're like, oh, we've got a series of gates here that we need to get through? Like, how much of this is how you kind of look back at it versus how much were you actually thinking that way at the time?
so if you look in the context of first startup, it's retro.
Yeah.
Retro. It was, but I would say like intuitively, you know what milestones you reach.
Yeah.
But definitely after the it's again it's as a founder you always evolve,
Yeah.
and next startup, the subsequent startup, you always tend to have more wisdom when you go and build it.
Yeah.
The only way I feel, Bruce, to short circuit that
Okay.
experience curve that you need is to get the exposure.
Okay.
So either you learn through experience or you learn through exposure. So either you put in the number of years. If you don't want to put in that years, you have to get that exposure to understand
Yeah.
that. And so
Yeah.
that's where I go back to, like, the reason I pushed myself as an engineer. It was incredibly hard to move over to sales. I still
Yeah.
remember the first call I made where I actually froze. And
I could. Oh, yeah. I
yeah,
get it.
and I was actually wishing that it hits a voicemail. It didn't. The person actually picked the call, and I still remember that name of the person who picked that call, and it was incredibly tough. But
Yeah.
it was important that I get that exposure. I understand what dialing means, because as engineers, we always used to curse the sales guys, that these guys bring the deals that we have to then do customization, additional software
Oh,
build
yes.
outs, and all of that. It's imposed on us. But when I moved over to the sales, that's when I learned how hard, how tough is a sales world. First of
Yeah.
all, you're hearing no more than you hear yes, and it always brings you down. So you have to figure out a way to motivate yourself. And second thing, sales is the only function in the organization where you have to influence external folks,
Yeah.
like people outside your folks,
Yeah.
and which is not in your control.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what was the first startup you had, and give us a little more details on the original model and how things evolved.
Yeah. So though I was part of the early founding team at Yodlee, which was a fintech platform where I got a lot of exposure, the first startup where I was a founder was uh, LeadFormix, which was a
Okay.
marketing automation platform that eventually exited to Calidus and then SAP. So that was the one where we first started as services.
Okay.
So that was a phase, Bruce, when things were coming online. A lot of stuff was coming online, and people
Yeah.
realized that print media, as we knew back then, which is newspapers, is going to face existential crisis,
Yeah.
and more publications will move online. And we were
Yeah.
like, me and my co-founder were like, if things are moving digital, it's basically ones and zeros. So we as engineers, we can determine what will work there.
That's a space we like.
Exactly. And then,
Yeah.
but then we've not had that much exposure to the chief marketing officers, to the different marketers out there. So what we said is that let's do one thing. Let's implement online SEO, search engine optimization, and paid campaigns, and that way provide something of value to the marketers, and in return we'll ask what tools they want, what are the gaps they are seeing in the market. So that's the reason we started with services, and that also helped us get some revenues to sustain ourselves. And in that whole context, we realized that the marketers actually needed a marketing platform where they can run their campaigns and measure the results. And that was not there. And so we started building out the platform. And when we were building out the platform, we realized that just a few months before Marketo had started their journey as well, then we realized that there is a legacy player called Eloqua, which was also there. And so why I'm referring to them is that it's one thing where you're building out a new category. It's another when, while you're building out a new category, you also have competitors. And as they say, at any time, 7 people have the similar idea. So I think that's...
Yeah, exactly.
So when I was developing LeadFormix, suddenly marketing automation became an extremely hot category. Every marketer wanted to buy the marketing platform. So year one, when we used to call the marketers, we used to get questions, what is marketing automation? Soon it turned to like, how do you differentiate? The next year it was like, how do you differentiate that category? And then the third year it was like, how do you differentiate with all these guys?
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of learning there, especially in terms of, as I said, how do you run the company when there are a lot of there are a lot of competitors, and when the overall category is constantly being developed.
Yeah. I'm curious how much of the decision to kind of bootstrap and focus on services to generate revenue and cash, how much of that was necessity of, you kind of needed to, how much of that was you just didn't want to have to go out and raise money, right? Like it's a pain, it's hard. And then I guess how did it help you, right? I mean, it sounds like a fairly quick moving market at the time. Did providing services give you an advantage in some way? I'm kind of curious on these decisions.
Yeah, great question, Bruce. So I think it was a function of the time at that time. So I was coming out from a previous experience where we had raised a lot of capital, and and the dot-com burst happened, and I saw the negative consequences of that. So maybe it left a little bit of bad taste in my mouth, and I was like, let me bootstrap and see how that goes. That is one. Second is the economy was just coming out of the dot-com burst. And so it was a function of that time that raising capital was not easy as well. So that led to, I think, us bootstrapping. The philosophy that exists today is that if you raise enough capital, that itself can serve as a moat to your competitors, didn't exist back then. So I feel like bootstrapping was much more respected back then than now.
Interesting. And how do you feel like it helped you, like being able to have this kind of direct, more kind of transactional services experience with these customers gave you unique insights or understanding of the market that you then were able to kind of weave back into your business, the product model?
Yeah, the earlier you can get to the customers, the better it'll serve you. So from that aspect, because we started services, we were with the customers, we used to go on site, be at their office, spend a lot of time actually running the campaigns. And so that definitely gave us enough experience and expertise to develop a marketing automation platform that's more user-friendly, that's more outcome-driven. So for sure. But remember, Bruce, that it does come at a cost. The cost is time. Right? So you are going to take much more time than you would otherwise to develop the product and then actually to generating revenue from your customer base.
Yeah. So you were coming out of a venture-backed company that was you had a lot of experience in that space. When you started this, when you started your first company, I guess how did you envision your exit? Did you have a very particular plan? Did you know when you wanted to exit, how much you wanted to exit for, who you were going to exit to? Like how much of this was kind of predetermined before you even started things, and how much did you kind of figure out as you went?
Yeah. So there, and I'll make some statements that I know now as well, after doing few startups. So my philosophy right from the start, Bruce, has been that never build a company for an exit.
Okay.
Always, as I said, the framework, right? The scale fit. Only
Uh-huh.
once you start seeing limitations, once you start seeing your growth getting stalled, or you can see the start that in order to expand
Okay.
into other categories, it's going to be more challenging. Only then think about an exit path.
Okay.
So that is, that is something that I truly believe that all founders should embrace. You should never design for exit. At the same time, you should always know that in your category, who are the potential players who can acquire you.
Okay.
So that then you always are looking for what do they have, where do they lack, what are the gaps they have right now in their product roadmap, so that you are covering that. That not only gives you an edge when competing against them, but it will also help you when eventually the acquisition conversations happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So you become a good strategic acquisition for them because you've got a unique capability or some gap that you're filling that they don't have. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we were going about LeadFormix, we knew that the potential acquirers would be the large enterprise, ERP players like Oracle, SAP,
Yeah.
um, Salesforce. So those were the main three guys who would be potential acquirer. And so we reached out to them for partnerships early on. And
Okay.
we were working with Salesforce. We could not get conversation with Oracle, and we started talking to SAP. That's how the eventual acquisition happened.
Yeah. So I guess two questions then. One is, I guess, how do you identify and how do you keep track of these bigger competitors or potential acquirers? Because sometimes, I mean, the ability to actually get insights and know their kind of products and services, publicly might be more difficult. Is there any way in which you could get more of these insights that will help guide your kind of strategic development? And B, tell me more about like reaching out early for partnerships. Like, how do you balance the, kind of staying under the radar and kind of getting as far as you can before you get on, on their map or on their competitive list, versus the benefits of establishing a relationship and getting some of that insight early? Like, how do you balance those?
Yeah. So staying under the radar, I'm not a big believer on
Okay.
that, Bruce, because this day and age, everything is out there in open. Everybody knows about everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So never hesitate because you want to be in stealth.
Okay.
Um, of course, till your product is fully developed, be in stealth mode. But once
Hmm.
your product is out there, once you are building your revenue function, you have your marketing doing campaigns, then everything is out there. Then
Yeah.
there's no point in hiding. Uh, and the key is basically to understand the category players really well, and that you should do even before you start building the product. You should
Okay.
understand who are the players who are in this category, what solutions they have, what are they not doing. If they are a public company, then download their quarterly reports so
Okay.
that you understand what are they promising for next year, so that you constantly understand their strategy and their product intent really well.
Yeah.
And then I also believe in this concept of tugboat. And tugboat is
Okay.
basically if there is if there's a medium to large player that's doing incredibly well, and you somehow figure out how do you attach yourself to them, then it can really help in your revenue trajectory. As an example, Salesforce. So when Salesforce early on launched their marketplace, there were a few companies that uh, took an aggressive stance in their marketplace. They poured in dollars,
Yeah.
in advertising in the marketplace. They participated in Dreamforce in a big way, and that really helped them to grow their revenues. So there's a company like Aptus, for example, which did CPQ, that were there on the Salesforce marketplace early on, and they invested their marketing budget. I remember used to be over 5 million just on
Wow.
Dreamforce, right? So they would take on a cafe near to the Dreamforce. They were along with being the top sponsors. They would then have their own big event, and that really helped take their revenue upwards. So
Yeah.
figuring out how do you reach out to players and how do you structure the early relationship. And to structure the early relationship, it's very, very important that you show them the value that you bring to the table. And that value could be innovation, that value could be a new solution, that value could be expertise on top of their platform. So something that they don't have, and show them that their win rate will go up because your product gets attached to their platform. If you're
Yeah.
able to establish that, then that's how you develop the relationship, and eventually it gets to M&A.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did you realize in your first startup here that you were either ready for, or it was time to exit, or a real exit started to be on the horizon? Like what was what transpired? Like what did you learn, or what happened to get you into that mode?
Yeah. So when, as I mentioned, we were competing with Marketo at that time,
Yeah.
and Marketo had raised a lot of capital. And so then we were thinking either um, we have to respond in a similar way by raising a lot of capital, or attach ourselves to a larger player.
Yeah.
And that's when we reached out to, as I mentioned, to the three players: SAP, Oracle, and Salesforce. We didn't get much love from Salesforce because they were doing a lot of joint campaigns with Marketo.
Yeah.
Oracle was taking a lot of time. Surprisingly, SAP at that time were thinking about their online strategy given the market pull that Salesforce had witnessed.
Yeah.
And so they had brought in experienced people at the leadership level, and mandated that they do incredibly well on the online cloud version of their product.
Yeah.
And this leader was looking for innovative solutions to bring home. And that's why in almost the second meeting, the leader expressed his desire to work
Okay.
closely with our platform. And for a small company, SAP expressing some sort of interest is a big thing. And we didn't have much experience before that. And so we were incredibly excited about potentially SAP acquiring us.
Yeah.
And that's how the conversations started, Bruce. But we didn't know that SAP is again a big giant, and
Yeah.
they take time to do everything.
Yeah.
And so it took multiple world of trips for me to understand the culture, and how much time it'll take for acquisition to happen. And that brought home a realization which is really important for all the founders, which is when an acquisition offer comes, the founders get really excited, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
and then they go all in on the acquisition. And the revenue then falls, and a lot of the acquisitions don't happen. There's a higher percentage that the
Oh
stats
yeah.
tell us that acquisition does not happen. And so the acquisition does not happen, your revenue has plummeted, and it's in a bad situation to be in. So one thing, after a couple of trips to Waldorf, we realized this. And so we were three co-founders back then, so we decided that only one co-founder will dedicate the time to go after the acquisition, whereas the other two founders will focus on the product development and revenue.
Yeah, yeah. No, classic scenario. And either, it falls apart, or you're getting these big haircuts, right? And the deal that you thought was amazing in the beginning all of a sudden becomes half of what you end up, signing on. What, you mentioned earlier, like you just said, you noticed the shift in the market and Marketo making their moves, and you needed to start thinking about acquisitions. And you said, we started to reach out to these people. How did you actually reach out? Like, how does this process work when you identify, like, hey, I've got, there's clearly, a half a dozen big players in this market that could be acquirers. Like, what is the process? Because it's both, actually establishing the connection or establishing the communication, but also you don't want to tip your hand too much. Like, how did you kind of navigate how do you actually make the connections and navigate a little bit of the information and exposure that would come?
Yeah. So, Bruce, I already explained about the LeadFormix scenario. I'll bring this home with my next company, which
go ahead.
was StrikeDeck, which was doing customer success automation. And again, I was thinking about the tugboat. I was thinking about the distribution, and I never had an acquisition in mind, but was all about how do we take the revenue forward. And so I remember I reached out to, and so at StrikeDeck I was competing against Gainsight, which similar to Marketo was a well-capitalized startup. And the players that I reached out to at that time was Segment, and then Pendo and Medallia. And they were from the perspective of channel partnership. And the way I was thinking was Segment does segmentation, and they are looking at various tools that can push data to their data warehouse and can pull in and generate value on top of their data, on the aggregated data. So, and Segment was just thinking about marketplace. And so from the timing perspective, I thought this is the right time to reach out to Segment. And the conversation should be about the marketplace that they are going to launch and how we can be the first few players to launch in their marketplace. And that's of high interest. So it's about reaching out to people and figuring out what's their top interest and how to align with it. So in Segment, I read on their website, I read some of their press releases that talked about, how marketplace is going to be a major initiative for them. So then was how do I align with their initiative and show them value? Pendo, similarly, Gainsight had acquired a company that did what Pendo did. And I said, enemy send me is a friend. And so I reached out directly to the Pendo CEO, talking about how the two companies can align and go to the prospects together. And they bring in, we both of us bring complementary skills to the table. And so that appealed, and so that started that conversation. And the two sales teams started working together, and we started seeing some awesome results, right? So that then teed off. Then with Medallia was almost all their customers were Fortune 5,000 customers. We knew that they only dealt with big, large enterprise companies. So I thought Medallia could be a great way for us to go to the enterprise customers, because as a small startup, there will always be question about the credibility. But then even if we had to co-brand with Medallia, even if we had to leverage their branding and we had to exist as a module in their product, even that would be of high value, because then we would be able to access customer segment that we wouldn't otherwise. And so then we reached out to them, and then Medallia team said, we deal with large data set and you have to prove that your platform can stand up to that challenge. And we were ready for that challenge. We did that pilot, and the pilot proved that our platform could ingest that data and still the performance won't be compromised. And so then that teed up for the next relationships, for the next conversations.
Yeah. I guess how much do you feel or advise founders, CEOs to have be kind of forward and leading this process and engaging in these ways and reaching out and finding these opportunities versus using other professionals, whether it's investment bankers or other consultants, to kind of do this kind of market search. I mean, I guess it's always a question for me of where does a CEO apply their time and energy? It should be on sort of strategy and running the business, looking at market opportunity and potential acquiring, and how, where do you see the balance, or how do you kind of advise folks in terms of where they should invest their time and energy and where they should use external professionals?
So, Bruce, there I believe in market pull rather than market push.
Okay.
So, when you hire an investment banker, it's a clear signal to the market that you are in a mood to sell.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when the buyers come to you, they will look to negotiate and push the price down.
Yeah.
That's the reason I believe in pull, right? So when you're thinking about your distribution, your channel, you're thinking about revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not proactively thinking about M&A. Now, down the road, if there is enough value generated and if the deal makes sense, then thinking about M&A works. So that's the reason why I believe that you should never build a company for exit. You should build company for greatness. You should build company to actually provide value. And then M&A could be one of the outcomes that you generate along the way. So that's the reason I'm not a big advocate of designing for an exit right from the get-go. Now, obviously, if a founder reaches a point where the founder is not able to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the founder feels there's an impending doom, and then and you're not even feeling confident about doing personal reach out, you bring in an investment banker and they bring professionalism. They know how to package your story, they know how to prepare the reports, and they have their Rolodex, they'll reach out to people, and so they will definitely bring that value to you, and you can leverage that.
Yeah.
That's my
I think we're
generally
I think we're on the same page. I mean, my thinking, my own experience, and having worked with a lot of these folks, is you always want to have a strategy for continuing to grow and expand the company. And if an opportunity comes out your way, obviously consider it, but you never want to be in a position where you have to sell. If you're in a position of having to sell, that's not a powerful position to be in. And so having the strategy and making sure the business has a future, regardless of whether or not you can sell, is going to be important. That said, I wanted to ask the other side of this, which is, are there things that you want to make sure that you do have, or sort of disciplines, or that things in the company that you need to have so that if an opportunity does come up, you can take advantage of it, and you're not kind of caught flat-footed, either not being able to take an opportunity because you don't have the right pieces in place, or you're just going to get hit on valuation because you don't have certain things in place. It's a good deal, you want to do it, but maybe you're taking a 20% haircut because you didn't do certain things. Like, are things you do suggest to founders that that they put into the company so that they're prepared for an exit if something comes up?
I'm so glad that you asked this question, Bruce, because this is where, as you know, I've been an investor, I've been an advisor, and I have my portfolio of startups, and I see a lot of startups not doing this right. Though you're not designing for exit, you always need to proactively think about how do you professionalize every function in your organization so that you're prepared if such eventuality comes on board. So the biggest advice I would provide is, from day one, have a data room. And this data room could be as simple as a folder in your Google Drive, or it could be a box account where every NDA that you sign, every agreement you have with the customer, every employee agreement, all of that,
employee agreements, those are the classic.
Exactly, should be in that data room. I have seen so many instances where, startups, at the time of the acquisition, realize that they don't have an agreement signed, either by an employee or by a customer, and then they go to the customer and employee, and out comes the ransom demand,
Yeah.
because the other party knows that there must be some
Exactly.
event that's
They need it
happening.
for something.
Exactly. So I've
Yeah.
seen founders being vulnerable at that moment. So
Yeah.
why go there? So have a data room, have the discipline to just, as soon as an agreement comes, you're uploading in that folder so that it's always there. The
Yeah.
second important thing from engineering perspective, Bruce, is when you're building the product, a lot of the engineering organizations, and it's a very common practice to use open source components. So check out the licensing that's there with the open source, because if you are getting acquired by a medium to a large company, they will do source code scan, and a lot of the times, if the product has been built with open source components where licensing is not proper, I've seen deals break down at that time. So that's the other thing. And then the third and an important advice is, as founders, we are passionate about building the product, and we are consumed by engineering and product mapping
Yeah.
exercise. Make sure that all your financial reports, your P&L
Okay.
report, and all of that are proper, because that will be the first thing that will get at um, at the acquisition point. And if you have time, also keep a spreadsheet where you're extrapolating stuff, which is down the road, um, like 1 year down the road, where will you be, right? What are the projections? So if you can have that also in a spreadsheet, different scenarios, that will be helpful. Um, but that's something that only top 1% of the founders do.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
well.
I always say one of the reasons I'm really big with my clients on doing rolling 3-year plans. So every year we create a new 3-year plan, is because we want to be able to show a track record of being able to do long-term planning and hitting those plans, and so that when I show them the next 3-year plan, they're not just like, well, this is pie in the sky. It's like, no, we can go back. I can go back 5 years and show them every 3-year plan that we've done and how we've executed against it. So it's building that kind of capacity for execution that investors then they'll look at it. They're like, oh, now this 3-year plan has credibility. But if it's just pulled
Absolutely.
out of the air, it's
Absolutely.
yeah,
But that, it's very difficult to do that when you are early phase of your startup,
yeah,
because your focus is on the product and the revenue.
yeah.
So that's
Getting
why I
fit.
said best in class founders make sure that they have a right finance person who has a rolling plan in place.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to end with kind of a question of like, as you've had a series of companies, a series of exits. So you've had a chance to iterate on this a couple of different times and kind of learn about this. Like, what are the big learnings that you've applied to your most recent venture? And, what are some of the insights and takeaways in terms of having done this a couple of times, and in terms of now, how are you approaching this, and what is your kind of best approach to getting a company up and running and getting traction, getting revenue? Like, what have you learned?
Yeah. So few things that I have learned with all the scars on my back uh, is, you know, uh, you know, before I explain, I would say I'm fortunate to be able to take my experience and apply it. And the few lessons are, one is basically dream big. If you don't dream big, then nothing will get manifested. So it's very
Yeah.
important to have that big ambition. Um, and big ambition translates into going after a big market, going after a generational innovation, right? You have to think massive. And that's one thing at Lember, we are thinking about how do we positively impact construction industry, where even
Yeah.
if we succeed in meeting 2% of our goals, it's still getting the construction industry to move forward, right? And that's basically the workforce crisis that construction industry is in.
Yeah.
The younger talent is not coming into the construction industry. There's disproportionate number of senior people in the industry. How do you get them to feel committed to the organization? How do you ensure that the skills are transferred? So that's the big mission that we are after, right? And construction industry, as you know, is one of the biggest in US and big even in the world, right?
Yeah.
So if you can go for the juggler, go for it, right? That's one. Second is team. You need to, if you're dreaming big and if you want to achieve it, you have to have an amazing team with incredible chemistry. And so, what I did while I was doing my last startup and while I was at Medallia, I had my notebook open, and any incredible performer, and it could be any function, it could be sales operations, it could be event management, it could be engineering, it could be product. I used to write down their names on my notebook. And so as soon as I started Lumber, I was able to reach out and bring them in. And then I have an incredible bench strength. Like as I keep raising newer rounds, I'll keep bringing in, people who are not only incredible in what they do, but also cultural fit. Because big organizations are only made when the culture is extremely strong.
Yeah.
And Bruce, for example, at Lumber, our culture is defined in just 3 alphabets, EOE. The first alphabet, E, stands for energy. Bring in the positive optimism to the table, can-do attitude, and go at it at an aggressive pace. The second alphabet, O, stands for ownership. There's no adult supervision at Lumber. You take the ball and you run with it. There's nobody standing over your shoulders, handing out instructions, nothing, right? The third, E, which is really important, is experimentation. Be experimental. Never hesitate in making the decision. Just remember, don't bring down the company. So make decisions and let then the data guide you. So defining that culture right at the start helps us as we recruit new talent. It's also motivating for existing employees. So I would say the third important thing is defining the culture upfront. If a founder comes to the meeting 10 minutes late, right when you start the startup, then that becomes a culture. Right? Then everybody says it's okay, it's kosher to come 10 minutes late, and that then spreads. So you have to define the culture, and you have to then practice what you preach. Then the other few things is that has been really helpful at Lumber is generally when you do a startup, you do things sequentially. You first think about the solution, you put out the product specs, then the engineering team builds a product, then you think about the go-to-market and so on. At Lumber, one thing that I have done is I started thinking about go-to-market motion as we were building products. So we had our salespeople, the first sales hire was done when I was doing my first engineering hire. Yeah. And that allowed us to go beyond our networks in signing up design customers, pilot customers, very early on, and those inputs has what helped us to create a world-class platform. Yeah. And so I would say that starting multiple functions early in the game helps you accelerate, helps you build a velocity that's faster and better than any other startups. So those are the key things that I've done at Lumber, and that's the reason why we are seeing the success we are seeing.
Yeah, I'm excited. I know you mentioned you've got some great traction. You're seeing things move quickly. I'm excited to kind of hear how things play out and have you back on once you've exited the next one, and we can talk a little bit more. But Shreesha, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time today. If people want to find out more about you, more about your background, more about what you're doing today with Lumber, what's the best way to get that information?
That would be my LinkedIn. And my handle is just my first name, last name together, Shreesha Ramdas. And that would be the best way to get connected and keeping in touch what we are doing.
Excellent. I'll make sure that's in the show notes so people can get that. Thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this podcast, Bruce.